The advertisement was on a job board I didn't remember subscribing to. That was the first thing I should have paid attention to, and the first thing I ignored. I was 26, 8 months behind on a private student loan that had been bought and resold 3 times until the collection agency calling me had a name I couldn't pronounce, and I was sleeping on the fold-out couch in my cousin's spare room in Reno because my last roommate had decided he wanted his girlfriend to move in instead of me. The email arrived at 4 in the morning on a Tuesday. I know because I was awake, watching the ceiling fan and trying to figure out whether I could survive on what was left in my checking account until the end of the month if I stopped buying anything other than rice. The subject line said, "Seasonal caretaker, private estate. $4,200 per week plus room and board. $4,200 a week." I read it 3 times before I let myself believe the decimal was where I thought it was. The body of the email was short. A private family was looking for someone to live on a remote property in northeastern Nevada from late autumn through early spring, monitor the grounds, keep the main house heated, and report weekly to a property manager. No experience required beyond general competence and a willingness to be alone. Background check. Yes. References? No. Start date. In 11 days. I wrote back before I finished my coffee. By that afternoon, I had a phone interview with a woman named Marlene who spoke like she was reading from a card and never asked me anything about myself except whether I had family who would expect to hear from me regularly. I told her my parents were dead and my sister and I weren't speaking. There was a small pause on the line and then she said, "That's fine. That's actually preferable from a scheduling standpoint." I should have heard it. I want to say I heard it and ignored it, because that would mean I had some agency in what came next. But the truth is, I didn't hear it at all. I heard $4,200 a week, and I heard room and board, and I heard a way out of the fold-out couch, and everything Marlene said after that washed over me like wind over a closed window. The contract came by overnight mail. 12 pages, I read maybe 4 of them. There was a non-disclosure clause, which I'd expected for a wealthy family. There was a clause about non-interference with property features, which I assumed meant don't touch the art. There was a clause that said I was not to leave the property between the hours of 9 in the evening and 6 in the morning under any circumstances, which I assumed was a security thing. I signed it on the kitchen counter while my cousin watched television in the next room, and I drove out 3 days later in a 2008 Corolla with a check engine light that had been on so long I'd stopped seeing it. The drive took 11 hours. The last 2 were on a road that wasn't really a road, just a graded dirt track running north off State Route 226 into a part of Elko County that didn't appear on any map I'd been able to find in my cousin's atlas. The GPS lost me about 40 minutes in and never came back. Marlene had given me a printed sheet of directions hand-typed with landmarks. Past the white silo, past the cattle guard. At the Y, take the left fork, not the right. The right fork is unmaintained. I followed them like scripture. The right fork, when I passed it, looked the same as the left, except that the grass growing up between the tire ruts was taller, and there was a single fence post standing about 10 feet in from the road with nothing attached to it. I arrived just before sunset. The house was bigger than I'd expected, and older than the photographs had suggested. 3 stories of dark stone and weathered cedar, set into the side of a long, shallow valley that sloped down toward a dry wash on the east side. There was a barn behind it that had been converted into a garage, a small outbuilding I would later learn was the well house, and nothing else for as far as I could see in any direction. No power lines, no neighbours. No road continues past the property. The track simply ended in a gravel turnaround in front of the house, and that was that. A man was waiting for me on the porch. He was maybe 60, tall and lean, wearing a canvas jacket and the kind of boots that had been resoled more than once. He introduced himself as Henrik and said he was the outgoing caretaker. He'd been there since April. He was leaving in the morning. They didn't tell me there'd be an overlap, I said. There isn't really. I'll show you the house tonight. I'll be gone before you wake up. He had dinner with me in the kitchen. He'd made a stew earlier in the day and he portioned it out into 2 bowls and set them on a long wooden table that could have seated 12. He ate quickly and quietly. I tried to ask him about the family that owned the house and he said he'd never met them. I asked him about the property manager and he said Marlene was fine. She paid on time. I asked him what I should expect, and he set his spoon down and looked at me for a long moment. There's a binder in the study, he said. Read it tonight. Read all of it. The rules in the binder are the job. Everything else is just living here. Rules. You signed the contract. I signed it, but I didn't. Read the binder, he said. If you have questions in the morning, I'll still be here for breakfast. After that, you're on your own. He went to bed at 8. I sat in the study with the binder until almost 2. The binder was a 3-ring binder with a cracked plastic cover, and the pages inside were typed on a typewriter, not a printer. Some of the pages were yellowed, and some were nearly new as if they'd been replaced over the years, as while others had been left alone. There was no title page. The first page just said, in capital letters at the top, House Procedures, and underneath that, a numbered list. I'm going to write the rules out the way I read them that first night, because the order matters. The order is part of how the binder makes you feel, and the way it makes you feel is part of why I stayed. 1. The main house is to be kept at a minimum interior temperature of 62 degrees Fahrenheit at all times. The thermostat is in the front hallway. Do not turn it below 62 for any reason, including conservation of fuel. 2. The kitchen pantry will be restocked every 14 days by a delivery service. You are not required to be present for the delivery. You are required to be inside the main house with all exterior doors locked from the time the delivery vehicle arrives until at least 1 hour after it has departed. The delivery occurs on alternating Wednesdays between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. You will hear the truck. Do not look at it. 3. The east wing of the second floor is closed. The door at the end of the second floor hallway is locked. It is to remain locked. You do not have a key. If you find a key, do not use it. If the door is open when you encounter it, close it without entering, and report the incident to the property manager in your next weekly report. 4. Do not leave the main house between the hours of 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. This includes the porch, the yard, the barn, the well house, and any point beyond the threshold of the exterior doors. If you hear something outside during these hours, do not investigate. If you hear something inside during these hours that you cannot account for, remain in your bedroom with the door closed until 6 a.m. 5. The well house is yours to use during daylight hours. The pump is reliable but old. If the pump fails, there is a manual override lever inside the well house, painted red. Do not use the manual override after dusk. If the pump fails after dusk, you will be without running water until morning. This is acceptable. 6. There is a radio in the kitchen tuned to a frequency that does not broadcast. Leave it on. Leave the volume at the marked position. Do not change the frequency. Do not turn it off. If the radio begins to broadcast, write down what you hear verbatim and include it in your weekly report. Do not respond to anything the radio says, even if it appears to be addressing you by name. 7. You will receive weekly reports from the property manager via the satellite phone in the study. You will submit weekly reports through the same device on Sunday evenings between 7 and 8 p.m. The phone does not make outgoing calls at any other time. Do not attempt to use it for personal communication. There is no cellular signal on the property. There is no internet. 8. If a visitor arrives at the property, do not open the door. Visitors are not expected. Any person who appears at the property between deliveries is not a person you are required to assist. Tell them through the door that the owners are not in residence and that you cannot help them. Do not engage further. Do not provide food, water, or shelter, regardless of weather conditions or the apparent state of the visitor. The nearest town is 41 miles south. They came from somewhere. They can return there. 9. If you become ill or injured to a degree that you cannot perform your duties, contact the property manager via the satellite phone. She will arrange for evacuation. Do not attempt to drive yourself out. The road is not reliable in winter. People have been lost on it. 10. Your contract is for 140 days. You will be paid in full upon successful completion, with a bonus of 15% if no rules have been broken. The property manager will know if rules have been broken. Do not attempt to conceal violations. Concealment results in forfeiture of all compensation, and is, additionally, a contractual matter that the family pursues. That was the first page. There were 43 more. The rest of the binder was elaboration. Each rule had its own section, sometimes a paragraph, sometimes 10 pages. The section on the radio was the longest. It described how to record what you heard, what kind of pen to use, and what to do with the paper afterward. There was a section on the pantry deliveries that described the sound of the truck, which the binder said was a diesel engine with a rattle in the muffler, and instructed me to recognize the sound so I would know not to mistake another vehicle for it. There was a section on the east wing that was only 2 sentences long. The east wing is closed. There is no further information. I read it all. I read it the way you read terms of service when you've already clicked accept, with the dim awareness that it doesn't matter what's in there because you've already agreed. By the time I closed the binder, the kitchen radio was the only sound in the house, a low, constant hiss like distant surf, and I realized I had been hearing it for hours without consciously noticing it. I went to bed in the room Henrik had pointed out on the first floor, a small bedroom off the back hall with a wood-burning stove and a window that looked east toward the dry wash. I left the curtains open. The moon was up, and I could see the slope of the land falling away in pale gradations of grey. I slept badly, but I slept. Henrik was already gone in the morning. He'd left the coffee pot full and a note on the kitchen table that said good luck. Don't read it twice. H. I didn't know what that meant. I poured myself coffee and stood at the kitchen window and watched the sun come up over the wash, and for about 10 minutes I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, which was the absence of pressure. No phone calls, no collection notices, no cousins' television muttering through the wall, just the wind moving across the grass and the radio hissing in the corner, and $4,200 a week accumulating in an account I hadn't yet had time to spend down. The first 2 weeks were almost pleasant. I established a routine. I woke at 6, made coffee, walked the perimeter of the main house and the barn and the well house, returned, ate breakfast, read for a few hours from the small library of paperbacks in the study, walked the perimeter again at noon, had lunch, did whatever maintenance task the binder suggested for that day of the week, checking the firewood stack, oiling the kitchen door hinges, running the generator for 15 minutes to keep the bearings turning, read again, walked the perimeter at 4, ate dinner, was inside with the doors locked by 8, and was usually in bed by 10. The radio hissed in the kitchen the entire time. I got used to it. After the third day, I had to consciously remember it was there, the way you have to consciously remember the refrigerator is humming. The first delivery happened on the Wednesday of my second week. I heard the truck at 11:40 in the morning, exactly as the binder had described, a diesel rattle coming up the dirt track from the south. I was in the kitchen at the time. The binder had said, "Do not look at it," and I had told myself in advance that I would not. But when the rattle got close enough that I could feel it in the floorboard, I felt a pull toward the window that surprised me. It wasn't curiosity exactly. It was more like the tug you feel when someone calls your name from another room, and you instinctively turn before you process whether it was actually your name. I went into the study instead and sat in the armchair facing away from the windows and read a paperback I wasn't following until I heard the truck rattle back down the track and fade out toward the south. I waited an hour. I made tea. I went out to the front porch and found 6 cardboard boxes stacked neatly against the wall to the left of the door, and the kitchen pantry was, when I checked, exactly as full as it had been before the delivery, which made no sense until I unpacked the boxes and realized the delivery wasn't restocking the pantry.
The delivery was additional food, packaged in the kind of sealed mylar that lasts decades. Beans, rice, powdered milk, dehydrated stew, boxes of crackers in foil. Things you would store if you were preparing for a winter you weren't sure would end. I carried them down to the cellar and stacked them on the shelves the binder had told me to use, and I tried not to think too hard about why a family that paid me $4,200 a week would want their caretaker stocked with 18 months of shelf-stable food. The first anomaly came on the 17th day. I was walking the noon perimeter, and I noticed that the fence post on the west side of the property, a lone post like the one at the Y in the road, with no fence attached to it and no visible purpose, had a piece of red cloth tied around the top of it. I was certain it had not been there the day before. I had walked past that post twice a day for 16 days, and I would have noticed. I stood looking at it for a long time. The cloth was a strip of something soft, maybe flannel, maybe an old shirt, tied in a simple knot. The wind was moving it gently. I thought about untying it, and then I thought about the binder, and the binder had not said anything about fence posts or red cloth, but it had said a great deal about not interfering with property features, and I decided that was close enough to the situation that I would leave it alone and report it on Sunday. I walked back to the house. I made lunch. I tried to read. I kept thinking about the cloth. At 3 in the afternoon, I went back out and walked the western perimeter again to make sure I had really seen what I'd seen, and the cloth was still there, and a second post about 40 feet north of the first one, a post I had absolutely never noticed before, also had a strip of red cloth tied around it. I went back to the house and I locked the doors, and I sat in the kitchen and I listened to the radio hiss for a long time. That night, for the first time, the radio said something. It was just past 10. I was in bed. I'd left my bedroom door cracked the way I'd been doing because the wood stove threw heat better that way. I heard a pause in the hiss, a dropout, a soft, clean second of nothing, and then a voice, low and male and not quite clear, said 3 words I couldn't make out, and then the hiss came back. I sat up. I went to the kitchen. I stood in front of the radio with the binder's pen and notepad in my hands, and I waited. The hiss continued without interruption for almost 40 minutes. I was about to go back to bed when the dropout happened again, and this time the voice said, very clearly, "He's still on the road." I wrote it down. He's still on the road. I put the pen down. I went back to bed. I did not sleep. In the morning, I walked the perimeter and counted the fence posts on the western side of the property, and there were 4 of them now, evenly spaced, each with a strip of red cloth tied around the top. I want to explain something about how I was thinking during this period, because I think it matters. I was not afraid yet. I was unsettled, but I had a binder full of rules, and the rules implied a system, and a system implied that someone had encountered all of this before and had figured out how to live inside it. The binder did not say, if you see red cloth on fence posts, leave immediately. The binder did not say that if the radio says something, you are in danger. The binder said, write it down and include it in your weekly report. The binder treated these things as normal occurrences within a job that paid $4,200 a week, and so I treated them that way too. This is, I think, how people stay. My first weekly report was due that Sunday. I'd been on the property 18 days. I sat in the study at 7 in the evening and I picked up the satellite phone, and Marlene answered on the second ring, exactly as the binder had said she would. "How are you settling in?" she said. "I'm fine. I have things to report." "Go ahead." I told her about the red cloth on the fence posts. I told her about the radio. I read her the 3 words verbatim. He's still on the road. There was a pause on the line that was longer than the pause she'd taken during my interview, and then she said, "Thank you. Have you opened the door at the end of the 2nd floor hallway?" "No." "Has it been open at any point when you've passed it?" "No." "Have any visitors arrived at the property?" "No." "Then you are doing well. Continue your routine. I'll speak with you next Sunday." "That's it? What were you expecting?" I don't know. Some kind of explanation." "The binder is the explanation," she said. "If the binder doesn't address it, it isn't your concern. Good night." She hung up. I sat in the study for a long time after that. The satellite phone's screen went dark. The radio hissed in the kitchen. I could hear the wind under the eaves on the north side of the house, where the slope of the valley funneled it against the stone. I thought about driving out. I thought about it concretely, the way you think about a thing you might actually do. How long it would take to pack, how much gas was in the Corolla, whether I could make it to the highway before dark. I thought about the $4,200 a week. I thought about the fold-out couch. I stayed. The escalation, when it came in pieces, and each piece was small enough on its own that I could absorb it. The radio spoke twice more in the next week. He turned around at the cattle guard. That was the 2nd time. He's at the silo now. That was the 3rd. I wrote them both down. I did not know who he was. I told myself it was a malfunction, a stray transmission from somewhere far away that the radio was picking up because the property had no other interference. I did not tell myself this with conviction. The fence posts kept appearing. By the end of the 3rd week, there were 11 of them on the western perimeter, each with its red cloth. I started counting them every morning. I started walking only the eastern and southern perimeters in the afternoons because I didn't want to look at the western ones twice a day. The pantry delivery came again on the 2nd Wednesday. This time, when I went out afterward to collect the boxes, there were 7 of them instead of 6, and the 7th box had no label. Inside it, packed in tissue paper, was a man's wool coat in roughly my size, a pair of leather gloves, a wool hat, and a pair of insulated boots. There was a note on top of the coat, handwritten, that said, "Winter is coming. Wear these when you walk the perimeter." The handwriting was not Marlene's, because I had her handwriting on the original directions. It was different, older. The letters had the wobble of someone whose hands didn't work the way they used to. I tried the coat on. It fit me almost exactly. I put it back in the box. I carried it down to the cellar and left it there. I told myself I would ask Marlene about it on Sunday. That Friday, the door at the end of the 2nd floor hallway was open. I had been upstairs to change a light bulb in one of the guest bedrooms, a task the binder had specified for that week, and as I came back down the hallway toward the stairs, I saw it. The door was about halfway open. Not flung wide, just pulled inward, casually, as if someone had walked through it and not bothered to close it behind them. I did not move for what felt like a long time. The binder had been clear. If the door is open when you encounter it, close it without entering and report the incident to the property manager. I walked toward it slowly. The hallway was carpeted in something old and thick, and my footsteps made no sound. As I got closer, I could see into the gap. There was no light inside. The hallway behind the door was dark, but not empty. I could see the outline of a runner carpet, the same dark red as the one I was standing on, extending back into a space that should not have been there. The east wing of the house, from the outside, was maybe 40 feet long. The hallway behind the door, from where I was standing, looked considerably longer than that. I could not see where it ended. I reached for the doorknob with my left hand. I kept my eyes on the floor of the hallway, on the runner carpet, because I had decided in some animal part of my brain that I did not want to look up. As I touched the knob, I heard from somewhere deep inside the east wing a sound. It was a very small sound. It was the sound of a person clearing their throat, the way you do when you've been quiet for a long time and you're about to speak. I pulled the door closed. I did it slowly because slamming it felt dangerous in a way I could not articulate. The latch caught with a soft click. I went downstairs. I did not run. I sat in the kitchen for 2 hours without moving. The radio hissed. At some point, I realized I was still wearing the work gloves I had put on to change the light bulb, and I took them off, set them on the table, and looked at my hands. And my hands were shaking. That was a Friday. I had 2 more days until I could report to Marlene. I locked my bedroom door that night, which I had never done before. I lay in bed and listened to the house. The house made a great many sounds I had previously categorized as the normal sounds of an old building. Settling, contracting, the wood cooling, and I lay there reclassifying every one of them. None of them resolved into footsteps. None of them resolved into a voice. But I could not stop listening. Around 3 in the morning, I heard the radio. The kitchen was at the other end of the house from my bedroom, and the radio's volume was set low. I should not have been able to hear it from where I was, but I could. It said very clearly, "He's in the house now." I did not get up. I did not move. I lay in bed with my eyes open until 6, and then I got up, and I made coffee, and I walked the perimeter, and the count of fence posts on the western side had gone from 11 to 14. I called Marlene on Sunday. I did not wait for her to ask me how I was settling in. I told her about the coat in the 7th box. I told her about the door being open. I told her about the throat-clearing sound. I told her about what the radio had said in the night. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she said, "Did you enter the east wing?" "No." "Did you respond to the radio?" "No." "Are you still in the main house?" "Yes." "Then you are still doing well. The coat is yours. Wear it. The temperature is going to drop next week." "Marlene." "Yes." "Who is he?" "The person on the road. The person in the house." There was a silence. It lasted long enough that I checked the screen of the satellite phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "I don't have an answer to that question," she said, finally. "The binder doesn't have an answer to that question. The family doesn't have an answer to that question. The job is not to answer the question. The job is to follow the rules. Have you considered that perhaps the rules exist because the question doesn't have an answer? That's not reassuring. I'm not paid to reassure you. I'm paid to confirm that you are following the rules. You are. Continue." She hung up. I sat in the study and I cried for a while, which I had not done in years. I wasn't sure exactly what I was crying about. I think it was the realization that I had taken a job whose central feature was the requirement that I not ask the question I most needed answered, and that I had been doing this job by that point for almost a month, and that I was going to keep doing it, because the alternative was the fold-out couch, and because the binder had become, in some way I did not want to examine too closely, the only structure I had left. I went back to my routine. I wore the coat. The temperature dropped exactly as Marlene had said it would, and the first snow fell on the 34th day. The snow changed things. Snow records what walks across it. The morning after the first snowfall, I walked the perimeter and saw a single line of footprints leading from the western fence, from one of the posts with red cloth on it, across the yard, around the south side of the main house, and up to the front porch. The prints stopped at the bottom step. They did not come up onto the porch. They did not turn around and go back. They simply ended, as if whoever had been making them had reached the bottom step and then ceased to exist. The prints were boot prints. They were roughly the size of my own, but the tread was different, deeper, more aggressive, the kind of pattern you'd find on a hunting boot. I stood at the bottom of the porch steps and I looked at the last print, the right boot, frozen in the powder. and I noticed that the snow inside the print was undisturbed. No melt, no drift filling it in, as if the print had been made in the snow at the moment I had walked outside, and not before. I went back inside. I locked the door. I went to the binder. I read the section on visitors again. I read the section on the perimeter again. I read the section on the door at the end of the second floor hallway, which was still only 2 sentences long. I read the entire binder cover to cover, looking for the word footprints, and I did not find it. There was a phrase, though, in the section on the radio that I had read several times without registering. It said, "The radio is a courtesy. The information it provides is for your awareness, not your action. You are not expected to use it. You are expected to acknowledge it." I had not thought about what acknowledgement meant. I thought about it now. The binder had told me to write down what the radio said, verbatim, and to include it in my weekly report. It had not told me to write it down for Marlene's benefit. It had not said the act of writing was for record keeping. The binder had said the act of writing was acknowledgement. I went back to the kitchen and I looked at the radio. It hissed. The volume marker, the small piece of black tape on the dial that the binder had told me not to move, was exactly where it had been when I arrived. I looked at the notepad next to it and I counted the entries. I had transcribed the radio 4 times. He's still on the road. He turned around at the cattle guard. He's at the silo now. He's in the house now. I tore the page out of the notepad. I folded it in half. I went to the wood stove in the kitchen, opened the door, put the page on the embers, and watched it curl and blacken. I do not know why I did this. I think I was trying to take something back. I think I was trying to unacknowledge. That night the radio did not speak. I told myself this was a good sign. I told myself this for 2 days. On the 3rd day, I walked into the kitchen in the morning, and the radio was off. The volume dial was still in the same position. The power switch was in the on position, but the hiss was gone. The kitchen was completely silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I stood in front of the radio for several minutes. I did not touch it. I went to the binder, and I read the section on the radio for the 5th or 6th time, and the binder said, in a sentence I had not registered before, or perhaps had not been there before, "If the radio falls silent, you have made a mistake. You have until the next moonrise to correct it." I am almost certain that sentence had not been on the page the day I arrived. I am almost certain. But I had read the binder so many times by then that I no longer trusted my certainty about anything inside it. I did not know what mistake I had made. I sat with the binder open in front of me for an hour, and I went back through everything I had done in the past 3 days. And the only thing I had done that felt like a mistake, when I held it up against the rules, was the page. The page I had burned. The radio's transcription, which I had been instructed to include in my next weekly report, and which I had instead destroyed. I went to the wood stove. The embers were cold. I raked through the ashes with the iron poker. There were flecks of paper, grey and almost weightless, scattered through the ash. I picked some of them out with my fingers. I tried to read them. I could not. I did the only thing I could think of. I sat down at the kitchen table with the notepad, and I wrote out the 4 sentences again from memory. He's still on the road. He turned around at the cattle guard. He's at the silo now. He's in the house now. I wrote them in the same order. I tried to use the same handwriting I had used the first time, although I am not sure why I thought that would matter. I left the page on the kitchen table next to the radio. The moon rose at 6:43 that evening. I was in the kitchen when it cleared the ridge to the east. I was watching the radio. At 6:46, the hiss came back. It came back gradually, the way a faucet sounds when it's just barely starting to drip. And then it was the soft, constant surf I had been hearing for a month, and the kitchen was alive again. I sat down at the table. I put my head in my hands. I cried for the second time in 3 days. The radio said very gently, "Thank you." I did not write that down. I do not know if that was another mistake. The next 2 weeks were the worst. The footprints came back. They came every morning after every snowfall, and they always ended at the bottom step. There were sometimes 1 set, sometimes 2, once 3. The fence posts on the western side stopped at 14 and did not increase further, but a new post appeared on the south side of the property with red cloth, and then another one, and another, until there were 5 posts in a line marching from the south fence toward the dry wash, ending about 100 feet from the back of the house. The radio spoke more often. He's hungry. He's cold. He's been waiting. I wrote everything down. I included it in my weekly reports. Marlene listened, asked her 3 questions: East Wing, radio response, visitors, and confirmed I was doing well. I stopped asking her who he was. I stopped asking her anything. We had a procedural relationship now, and the procedure was a comfort. On the 47th day, the visitor came. I was in the study in the late afternoon, reading. I heard a car. This was in itself impossible. The binder had told me which sounds to expect, and the only vehicle that came up the dirt track was the delivery truck. And the delivery truck was a diesel rattle, and what I was hearing was the smooth purr of a gasoline engine. I went to the front window and looked out. There was a green pickup truck in the gravel turnaround. A man was getting out of the driver's side. He was middle-aged, maybe 50, wearing a barn jacket, jeans, and a wool cap. He looked normal. He looked like someone who lived in the area, who maybe had taken a wrong turn off 226 and come up the wrong fork at the Y. He stood next to the truck for a moment, surveying the house, and then he walked up to the porch and knocked. I did not move from the window. I watched him. He knocked again, harder. He called out, "Hello? Anybody home? My truck's overheating. I just need some water." I did not respond. I remembered the binder. Tell them through the door that the owners are not in residence and that you cannot help them. I had not done that. I had remained silent. I considered going to the door and saying it, and then I considered the radio, and the throat clearing in the east wing, and the footprints that ended at the bottom step, and I decided that the binder's instructions were a maximum, not a minimum. I could do less than the binder asked. I could not do more. The man knocked a third time. He stepped back from the door and looked up at the second-floor windows. I do not know if he saw me at the study window. I do not think he did, because he did not call out again. He stood on the porch for what felt like a long time. Then he turned and walked back to his truck, got in, and drove away. The truck went back down the dirt track, smooth and quiet, and disappeared around the bend toward the Y. I should have felt relief. I felt it for about 10 minutes. Then I went to the kitchen to make tea, and the radio said, "He's still on the road." And I understood that the man in the green truck and the he in the radio were not the same person, and that they had never been the same person, and that I had been wrong about almost everything I had been telling myself. The radio spoke again that night, after dark, after I had locked all the doors. It said, "He went to the wrong house." I sat with that for a long time. He went to the wrong house. The man in the green truck. He had gone to the wrong house, which meant there was a right house, which meant the radio was tracking a person who was supposed to come here, and the man in the truck had been a deviation, an error, someone the system had expected to be the person and who turned out not to be. "He's still on the road," the radio kept saying, for weeks. The radio was waiting. The radio was waiting for someone who was supposed to arrive. I do not know how I knew this, but I knew it. The binder had not told me. The binder had been carefully constructed to never tell me anything. But I had been in the house for 47 days, and I had walked the perimeter every day, and I had been listening to the radio for 47 days. And at some point during that time, my brain had begun assembling a picture out of the things the binder did not say. The fence posts marked a perimeter that was getting closer to the house. The footprints came up to the bottom step, but did not climb it. The east wing was longer on the inside than on the outside. The radio was tracking something that was approaching from the south, slowly, over a long period of time, and the rules I was following were not protecting me exactly. The rules were protecting the house. The rules were to keep the house ready for something. I did not sleep that night. In the morning, I went to the satellite phone in the study and I tried to call Marlene. The phone would not let me. The screen displayed the message, "Outgoing, unavailable. Next transmission window, Sunday, 1900. I knew this. The binder had said this. But I tried anyway, 3 times, because I needed it not to be true. I went back to the kitchen. I sat at the table with the binder open in front of me. I read it from the beginning, all 44 pages, slowly, looking for any rule that addressed what to do if you understood what was happening. There was no such rule. I read the contract too, the 12 pages I had skimmed in my cousin's kitchen. I read the paragraph about leaving early. Voluntary departure before the completion of the contract term results in forfeiture of all compensation. The departing caretaker assumes all costs of removal and is responsible for the property's condition until a replacement caretaker is in residence. I read it twice. The phrasing was strange. Until a replacement caretaker is in residence. Not until your replacement arrives, or until the property manager engages a successor. until a replacement was in residence. As if the replacement was already coming. As if the replacement had been on the way for some time. He's still on the road. I packed a bag. I want to say this clearly because it matters. I packed a bag and I drove out. I did not finish the contract. I forfeited the money. I left on the morning of the 48th day, in full daylight, with the heater in the Corolla running at full blast and the gas tank topped off from the property's reserve tank, and I drove down the dirt track at 20 miles an hour because the snow was patchy and I did not want to slide into the ditch. I passed the cattle guard. I passed the white silo. I reached State Route 226 at just past 11 in the morning. I turned south. I drove until I hit a town big enough to have a gas station and a diner, and I sat in the diner and ate a hamburger and drank 3 cups of coffee and looked at my phone, which had no signal until I'd been on 226 for almost an hour, and which by then had 47 missed calls from a number I did not recognize. I did not return any of them. I drove back to Reno. I slept on my cousin's fold-out couch again. I did not tell him what had happened because I did not know how to. I told him the job had not worked out and that the family had been difficult. A week later, a check arrived in the mail. It was from a law firm I had never heard of. It was for the full amount of my contract, 140 days at $4,200 a week, plus the 15% bonus. There was a letter with it. The letter said the family had decided to honor the contract in full in recognition of my service, and that the matter was now closed. The letter was signed by Marlene. I cashed the check. The money cleared. I paid off the student loan. I moved into my own apartment. I got a job at a logistics company doing dispatch work, which was boring and steady, and I did it for about 2 years. I want to tell you that the story ends there. I want to tell you that I left the house and the house left me, and that the $4,200 a week was the best mistake I ever made because it bought me out of a hole I might otherwise have spent a decade climbing out of. I want to tell you I never thought about the binder again. But that is not how it ended. About 6 months after I left, I started to notice that I was always cold. Not pathologically, not in a way that anyone else commented on, just slightly, persistently cold, in a way that no amount of clothing seemed to address. I kept the heat in my apartment at 62 degrees because anything warmer felt wrong. I did not consciously choose this number. I noticed it one day, looking at the thermostat, and realized I had been setting it at 62 for months without thinking about it. About a year after I left, I started leaving a radio on in my kitchen, a small one, tuned to a frequency that did not broadcast. I told myself this was a quirk, a habit picked up from the property, the kind of thing you do because the silence of your own apartment, after months of constant low hiss, feels unbearable. I did not consider at the time what the binder had said about acknowledgement. About 18 months after I left, I came home from work and found a small piece of red cloth tied around the railing of the fire escape outside my kitchen window. I lived on the 4th floor. I took it down. I threw it away. I did not call anyone. There was no one to call. A week after that, the radio in my kitchen, which had been hissing for over a year without interruption, spoke for the first time. It said very softly, "He's still on the road." I am writing this on a Sunday evening. It is 7 o'clock. I am at my kitchen table and the radio is hissing, and my apartment is 62 degrees, and there is no fence post outside my building because I live in a city. But there is a strip of red cloth tied around the lamp post across the street that was not there yesterday. And there will be another one tomorrow, and another one the day after that. And I have been counting them, because that is what you do. I do not know who he is. I never knew. I was wrong on the 47th day when I thought I had figured out the picture. The picture was bigger than I'd guessed. The house was not waiting for someone to arrive. The house was waiting for someone to leave. The rules were not keeping the house ready for an arrival. The rules were a test of a kind, to see whether the caretaker could be trusted to carry the house with them when they went. Henrik had carried it. The caretaker before Henrik had carried it. Whoever had handwritten the note in the 7th box, with their wobbly old letters, had carried it for a long time, long enough that the wobble had set in. The note had said, "Winter is coming. Wear these when you walk the perimeter." I did not understand then that the perimeter was not the property. The perimeter was wherever I went next. The perimeter was the apartment in Reno, and the city after that, and every place I would ever live. And the coat in the cellar had been for me in the winters that were still coming. And I had left the coat behind. But the winter had come anyway, and the rules had come with it, because the rules were not about the house. The rules were about the caretaker. I have not been back. I will not go back. I do not know what the family is. I do not know if the family is anything at all, or whether family is just a word Marlene used because it was the easiest word for someone like me to accept. I do not know if Marlene is real, or if she ever was, or whether she is just a voice on a satellite phone that exists because someone, at some point, needed there to be a voice. I know that the radio is hissing. I know that I will not turn it off.
I know that I will leave it at the volume it found by itself, which is, when I checked this morning, exactly the position the dial had been in when I arrived at the house, marked with a small piece of black tape I do not remember applying. I know that I keep the apartment at 62. I know that I do not, under any circumstances, look out the kitchen window between 9 in the evening and 6 in the morning, even though no rule says I shouldn't, even though the binder is 41 miles south of an unmarked dirt track in a county I will never set foot in again. I do not look out the kitchen window at night. I have decided this. I have made this rule for myself, and I follow it. And I do not know whether I made the rule because I am afraid of what is outside, or because I am afraid that the act of looking is itself the thing that finishes whatever was started on the 47th day. I think about the man in the green pickup sometimes. I think about how he drove away. I think about how the radio said he went to the wrong house. And I think about how, at the time, I assumed that meant he had taken a wrong turn. I think now that it might have meant something else. I think it might have meant he was supposed to come here. And he turned around, and now we are still waiting. I think about whether I went to the wrong house. I think about whether the wrong house is the one I am sitting in now. The radio is hissing. The kitchen is 62 degrees. The strip of red cloth on the lamp post across the street is moving very slightly in the wind, and I can see it from where I am sitting. And I am trying very hard not to count the others, because I have not yet looked. And as long as I have not yet looked, The number is not yet a number, and the perimeter has not yet closed. I took a high-paying job in the middle of nowhere. It was a big mistake. I came home with the money, and I came home without the binder, and I came home, I thought, alone. I was wrong about the last part. I'm going to stop writing now. It is almost 8. The transmission window will open in a few minutes, and I have not yet decided whether to answer, but the satellite phone has been on my kitchen counter for 3 weeks, and I do not remember bringing it home. It was not in my bag when I left. It is here now. The screen is lit. It says incoming.